When you work in a cafe, you get used to seeing the same people. Morning routines, afternoon study sessions, and the pair who never tips but always divides a muffin. After working here for over 2 years, I've gotten to know most of the individuals that come in, and I even know some of them by name, like Mark. One of the more reserved regulars, Mark always arrived at the same time just before the morning rush, ordered a black coffee, and sat at the farthest table by the window. He was the kind of customer you hardly noticed until he noticed me. He was never aloof, just aloof, and never made small talk or lingered. He always paid in cash. I had just finished boiling milk for a latte a week after I had relocated when I felt like I was being watched. I looked up. Mark was at his usual table watching me, which was strange because he never watched anyone. I forced a polite smile before he turned back to the espresso machine, brushing it off as if I was dreaming. Then, when I handed him his coffee, he spoke first, which was also strange because he never started conversations. I blinked. Sorry. Mark tilted his head slightly. In your apartment you like it made my stomach drop. I hadn't told anyone I moved for a second, and I wasn't sure how to react. I hadn't mentioned moving at work, I hadn't updated my address on social media, and I hadn't told anyone but my landlord and a few close friends. Mark should not have known. I forced a laugh. How did you? Mark just smiled, lucky guess, and left before I could question him. The fact that he said it so casually, as if we had discussed it before, made my skin crawl. I spent the rest of my shift trying to convince myself that I was overreacting, but the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe early, and I told myself that I just wanted to clear my head before the rush, but in reality, I wanted to see if Mark would say anything else at 7:45 a.m. Sharp Mark stared at me yesterday, his face inscrutable, and he moved toward the counter with the same blank look in slow, methodical strides. I stiffened as I rang up his customary black coffee, my fingers hovering over the register before I forced myself to speak. You never answered my question. I swallowed hard, wondering how he knew I had moved. He gazed for a while, then smiled the same kind but vacant grin as yesterday. You just seem different, he murmured softly, suggesting that maybe this was a new beginning. The way he said it, as if he knew something I didn't, caused my hands tighten into fists, and I felt my stomach churn. It wasn't a response, but rather a diversion. Just like yesterday, Mark took his coffee and left, and I stood there frozen, watching him sit by the window as if nothing had happened. By the time my shift ended, I had persuaded myself that I needed to check my apartment, and the first thing I did when I got home was make sure my locks were deadbolt locked. Windows closed tightly, nothing seemed amiss, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I was about to give up when I noticed something that made my skin crawl, the coat rack near my door. I always kept 3 jackets on it, one for work, one for cold days, and one that I hardly wore at all, but now there were only 2 left, and the third was gone. I stood there, gasping for air, wondering if I had moved it or stuffed it in a closet and forgotten. I checked the hallway outside my apartment, but nothing was there, and it was just gone. A slow, chilling realization crept up my spine. Someone had been in my apartment, and whoever they were, they had taken something small that I wouldn't notice right away. I locked the door and backed away from it, my mind racing, and then, as if the universe wanted to confirm my worst fear, my phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. "Red looks good on you." My throat went dry. I didn't own anything red except the missing jacket. A wave of nausea hit me. I forced myself to type out a response. "Me, who is this?" No answer. I tried calling straight to voicemail. I felt exposed, vulnerable. Watched. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my key, shoved my phone into my pocket, and left, because right now I couldn't be in that apartment, and if Mark knew where I lived, I wasn't going back there alone. I didn't go back to my apartment that night. I crashed on my friend Matt's couch instead, though I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone standing outside my door, or worse, already inside. And the text "Red looks good on you," it wouldn't leave my head. Who sent it? How did they get my number? And most importantly, was it Mark? By morning I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't live in my apartment knowing someone had been inside. I had to figure out how they got in. So after a few hours of debating, I finally forced myself to go back. Matt offered to accompany me, but I declined. I'm not sure why. Perhaps I was worried about coming across as paranoid, or perhaps I just didn't want anyone else to realize how terrible this was. Regardless, I went alone, and as soon as I entered, I knew something wasn't right. The air felt different, like someone had been there, but nothing seemed out of place. There was no forced entry, and no broken locks. I took another look in the closet. When I turned to face the mirror, I noticed something written on it, not in marker or pen, but in steam, as if someone had stood in my bathroom after taking a shower and used the condensation to leave me a message. The jacket was still missing, so I did something I hadn't done before. At first, everything seemed normal: the sink, the shower, the toothbrush, which I had left out in a hurry this morning. I backed out of the bathroom as my breath came in shallow bursts. The texts, the missing jacket, the message on the mirror, and my stomach turned into knots as I moved closer. The faint letters became clearer, and then I saw two words: "See you." I felt my knees weaken because I hadn't taken a shower that morning, meaning whoever wrote this had been in my apartment while I was away. I quickly left the flat after grabbing my keys, hardly remembering to lock the door. As soon as I was outside, I contacted the police and handed them all of my messages. When I told them about Mark and how he knew I had moved before I told anyone about how he always watched me, their interest peaked, so they asked, "Do you have any proof that he's been inside your apartment?" I hesitated. "Do you have any proof that he's been inside your apartment?" To my surprise, they actually took me seriously. An officer met me at my apartment and did a full walkthrough, checking every room and every possible entry point. There was no sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing. "No," the officer groaned, "and at this point, the only thing we can do is file a complaint and replace your locks. Be careful who you talk to, and call us right away if anything else happens." 2 weeks ago, Mark stopped coming to the cafe, and his usual table by the window was empty. No one seemed to care where he went, and the strangest part was that there were no more strange texts or signs of anyone inside my apartment. It seemed like whoever had been watching me had moved on, and I should feel relieved and safe, but I don't, because someone still has my jacket, my phone number, and someone who knew exactly where I lived before I told anyone decided to vanish. But I don't think they're gone. I think they're just waiting for something I don't know, and I don't want to find out. Residing in an apartment complex, Lex comes with a certain amount of anonymity. You walk past your neighbors in the hallway and they nod courteously, but you hardly ever speak more than a few words. I liked it that way. I liked coming home, locking my door, and keeping the outside world out. For this reason, I installed a security camera outside my apartment. I didn't do it because I felt unsafe, but rather out of caution. The building already had cameras in the hallways and elevators, but I preferred to have my own pair of eyes. I occasionally reviewed the footage, mostly out of habit. It was comforting to know that if something ever happened, I'd have evidence that nothing out of the ordinary for months. However, one night, I noticed something odd. I had arrived home late from work and was absent. Mindedly scrolling through my security app while eating dinner, the feed from my door camera showed the usual empty hallway, nothing out of place, but when I switched over to the elevator footage, my stomach twisted because at exactly 3:12 a.m. a man stepped out of the elevator and stood in the hallway. He didn't move, he didn't knock, he just stood there facing my door. I watched, expecting him to do something, to press the wrong doorbell, to turn away, to leave, but he didn't. For 7 minutes he stood motionless. Then, without a word, he turned and got back into the elevator. I would have never known. I hadn't heard a sound. My building was quiet at night, the kind of place where the only noises came from the occasional footsteps of a neighbor coming home late. But I had never noticed anyone lingering outside my door. Before I rewound the footage and watched it again, looking for any details I might have missed. The man was tall, wearing a dark hoodie. With the hood up, his face was obscured, but his posture was unnerving, completely still, like he was waiting for something or someone. I told myself it was just a fluke. Maybe he was drunk, maybe he had the wrong floor, maybe. But then curiosity turned into dread. I started scanning through the security logs, checking past footage for the last 2 weeks. The same guy has been doing the same thing every night around 3:12 a.m. He had been standing outside my door every night, watching, and I had never noticed. I slowly turned my head toward my apartment door, half expecting to see someone standing on the other side. But my breath felt shallow and my fingers were clenched around my phone as I stared at the screen. I had no idea who he was or what he wanted, but one thing was certain: he wasn't going to stop. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I laid in bed and stared at the ceiling while holding my phone tightly. By 3 in the morning, the slightest noise from the corridor sent shivers down my spine, and every creak in the apartment made my pulse race. At precisely 3:02 a.m., I was fully awake and monitoring the live stream from my security camera. The hallway was deserted, and the seconds passed slowly and oppressively. The elevator doors opened, and he stepped out. I held my breath even through the grainy security footage. His dark hoodie and his immobile posture made me feel as though I was suffocating. He wasn't here to visit someone else, he wasn't lost, and he wasn't here for me. I should have called the police, grabbed my keys, and run, but I was unable to do either. Instead, I sat there, paralyzed, watching the seconds pass by. 1 minute, 2 minutes, and 5 minutes. I considered calling out to him to leave, telling him I could see him, but what if that made matters worse? He turned, walked back into the elevator, and vanished after 7 agonizing minutes. I let out a shaky breath, my whole body trembling. This wasn't normal, and I couldn't ignore it. I had to do something, so the following morning I went straight to the building manager's office. His name was Kevin, and he was a man in his 60s who always smelled like coffee and cigarette smoke. He began shaking his head after I had barely finished explaining half of what had transpired. "Yeah, that's not right," he said, stroking his chin. "You got the footage?" I opened the video on my phone and gave it to him. As he watched, his face darkened. I acknowledged that I didn't remember this neighbor. We keep track of every renter and visitor who enters the property, so if this person is coming in every night, we'll know how to. I nodded, holding onto the edge of his desk with my fingers. Could you check the logs to see whether Hyun is a resident? I watched over Kevin's shoulder as he quickly typed on his computer and brought up a list of key card entries. Every time someone used their fob to enter the building, it was recorded, and a screen flickered as it loaded the logs for the previous week. My heart was racing as I looked for the answer, and then I realized that the elevator camera had caught him, but the entry logs hadn't. He wasn't using a key card to get inside. He had never scanned in. He was simply there. I stepped back, my skin crawling. How could it be? Kevin scowled. Maybe he was sneaking in behind people as they opened the door, or he stopped. I followed his eyes back to the television, all the while feeling sick to my stomach. The video showed the guy entering after peering at my door, and the doors closing, but there was no sign of him leaving until I took a deep breath. So where in the world is he going? The man never utilized the elevator to go back down. Kevin didn't respond as he was unaware that I had closed all the windows and doors that evening. Every time the wind shook my balcony at 3:10 a.m., I pushed a chair under the doorknob, my pulse pounding. The corridor was deserted when I activated my security feed, so I tightened my hold on my phone. 3:12 a.m. The elevator doors opened, and the man emerged. He took a step forward this time, and then another, and I felt my breath catch. He had never moved before, never come very close, but now he was approaching my door. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking, and dialed 911, 911. What emergency do you have? I was whispering to the man outside my apartment. He's been coming every night, and he's standing right there. Please, please, send someone, stay on the line. He was just a few feet from my door when he reached for the handle, and I barely had time to react before the hallway camera cut to static. The screen flickered black for a moment, then went completely blank. I stared at my phone, my pulse pounding in my ears, and I gripped it tighter. "Hello," I said to the dispatcher. "Are you still safe inside your apartment?" she asked. "I think so, but the camera just cut out my voice shaky." I returned my focus to the hallway and listened, but my breathing was too loud and the quiet was so loud that I had to strain my ears to hear anything, like a footstep or someone attempting the handle, but all I heard was a steady, purposeful knock. My heart almost stopped when I heard 3 steady knocks on the wood in my apartment. I swallowed hard because he had never knocked before. I looked at the door, half expecting the knob to turn, but instead I heard footsteps that made my stomach drop. They were slow, measured, and paced right outside my door, as if he knew I was inside and was too afraid to move. The dispatcher's voice jolted me back, and I flipped back to the hallway camera feed in the hopes that it would return. The screen flickered, and then the feed came back, but the hallway was empty. I blinked, and I heard him knocking. "Hyun's gone." I whispered, "I don't know where he went," and the pacing had stopped. The hallway was silent, but I knew he was still nearby. But then something made my stomach turn. I checked the elevator camera, and the man had always left in the same way, getting back in the elevator and vanishing, but tonight there was no footage of him ever entering. I stared at the screen, my fingers numb, wondering, if he wasn't in the hallway anymore, where the hell did he go? Its officer was summoned by the voice. Daniels, are you inside? We received a call from dispatch. When I eventually managed to open the door, two cops in uniform were standing outside asking whether I was all right. My hands were trembling so badly that I fumbled with the latch twice. Officer Daniels inquired while looking around the corridor. I shakily breathed. I don't know, he was just here. He knocked and then paced outside my door, but when the camera returned, he was gone. The cops looked at each other, and we had already inspected the stairwells and halls. Daniel remarked, "No sign of anyone." I combed through my hair in an attempt to make sense of it. We even looked through the elevator records, I'm sure. No unlawful key card scans were added by the other officer. I shook my head, saying that there was no unexplained movement inside or outside the building. He had been here for weeks, so we'll look at the surveillance tape. Daniels promised that we would identify the person if they have been knocking on your door every night. I nodded while continuing to hold my phone. I read through the security records as you requested when Kevin, the building manager, contacted me the next morning. His voice was softer than normal, so I sat up and paused again. We found nothing, which made my stomach sink. There was no video of him at all, and Kevin went on, not in the elevator, nor in the hallways, so I shook my head and gripped the phone even more tightly. I saw him. He was there. The sister system doesn't lie, so if someone had been in the building, we would have seen them. Kevin paused, but I opened my security app and scrolled through the saved recordings, finding that every video of him standing outside my door every night was still there. However, now something was different. When the elevator doors opened at 3:12 a.m. the night before, the hallway was deserted, and I could see my breath catching in my throat. I knew what I had seen. I had seen him leave and knock on my door, but now there was nothing, as if he had never been there at all. I sat frozen, staring at the screen, my mind racing. Over the phone, Kevin's voice cracked. Maybe you should spend a few nights somewhere else just to be safe. I took a deep breath and said, maybe I should pack a bag and stay at a hotel that night rather than checking my security feed or looking at my phone. I just switched on the TV, shut the door, and tried to act as if nothing had occurred. The next morning, I received an email from the building security firm with a basic system update warning. I quickly read it and saw that it spoke about automatically deleting corrupted video from my stomach. It's been a few weeks since I moved out of the building and moved to a new place across town without elevators, and I never figured out who he was or how he got in. However, sometimes late at night when I close my eyes, I can still picture him standing there still silently watching, and I can't help but wonder if I checked the hallway camera tonight would he still be there. Twisted, I went back to my app and saw that all of the old recordings of him standing outside my door had been erased. I stared at my screen, my heart racing. The idea came to me while I was watching a video about home security. Some ex-burglar was explaining the easiest ways people get into apartments, and one of the first things he mentioned was spare keys. People think they're being clever, he said, shaking his head, but burglars know exactly where to look: under the mat, inside a fake rock, on top of the door frame. It's the first thing we check. I glanced at my own doormat and felt a weird itch of curiosity. How many people had lifted it hoping to find a key? That's when I got the idea. I found an old key that didn't open anything, a useless spare from a lock I didn't even own anymore, and placed it under my mat just to see if anyone would take the bait. For over a week nothing happened. Then today I got home, lifted the mat out of habit, and felt my stomach drop. The key was gone. I didn't tell anyone about it. No one was supposed to know, but someone had checked and someone had taken it. I stood there for a long time staring at the empty spot under the mat, my mind racing. The first possibility that crossed my mind was maintenance. They had spare keys anyway, but maybe they thought I was being careless and took it, or maybe it was a neighbor. Someone saw it and thought it was funny. But if that was the case, wouldn't they have mentioned it? Wouldn't they have put it back? A sick feeling curled in my gut as a third possibility formed. What if someone thought it was real? What if they took it thinking they could use it later? I turned around, scanning the hallway. It was empty, normal, but suddenly it didn't feel that way. I pulled out my actual key, unlocked my door, and stepped inside, quickly shutting and locking it behind me. I walked through my apartment, checking every window, every closet. Nothing was out of place. There were no indications that anybody had entered. But that didn't mean they hadn't planned to. When my phone buzzed, I thought it would be a business email or a group chat. But when I looked at the screen, my breath froze in my throat. I sat down on the sofa and tried to regulate my breathing. This had to be a coincidence. My palms felt clammy as I glanced at the message. Nice trick. A lump appeared in my stomach. Unknown number. Did you think I wouldn't notice? I felt dizzy. My fingers lingered over the screen. My heart was thumping in my ears. I had laid a trap and someone had taken the bait. I gulped hard, my mind racing, and I didn't recognize the number. It wasn't stored in my contacts. What a wonderful trick. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Just those words, hanging in my inbox like a threat, without a name or profile picture. I tried to come up with a reasonable explanation. Perhaps it was a practical joke, or perhaps a friend had discovered the key and was playing a practical joke on me. But how would they know I hadn't told anyone? Besides, this didn't feel like a joke, so I made myself respond. Who is this? The typing bubble appeared instantly, then vanished, and I waited, my heart racing every second that seemed to go by forever, before receiving another message. I got up from the couch and went straight to my door to check the peephole. The hallway was empty, so I threw the deadbolt, secured the chain, and then went to check my windows locked. The logical part of me kept saying, this is just some __ messing with you. But the deeper part of me was drowning under the weight of something worse, because if they had found the fake key, it meant they had lifted my mat, which meant they had stood at my door. I tried shaking it off, but curiosity can be dangerous. I called the cops as my fingers were hovering over the keyboard. I nearly did, but what if someone stole a key that didn't open anything? Someone sent me a spooky text, telling me to block the number and move on. Perhaps I should have, but instead I did something dumb and texted back, "What do you want?" I regretted sending it, and the response came almost instantly, unknown number. I wanted to see what you did next, so I got up so quickly that my chair scraped the floor, and I wasn't going to sit here waiting. Before I could call, my phone vibrated once again, so I looked through it and discovered my buddy Matt's contact information. A picture of my stomach. My front door was twisted as I tapped to open it. It was taken from just down the hallway from a low angle, as if someone had squatted down to take it. I felt like I was going to throw up, so I ran back to the peephole, which was still empty, but I knew better now. They had been watching and waiting, and they wanted me to know it. I backed away from the door, my pulse pounding in my ears. Whoever it was, They had been at my door, taken the fake key, had my number, and were now watching me. I forced myself to take a slow, shaky breath. I scrolled to Matt's contact again, my hands shaking, and just as I pressed the call button, another text came in an unknown number asking for help. I almost dropped my phone, but this wasn't possible. I turned toward the nearest window and pulled the blinds open. The street below appeared normal, with a few cars parked along the curb, and no one standing around, but they weren't there. Before Matt answered, the phone rang twice. "Hey man, what's up?" I swallowed hard. "Someone is playing tricks on me," he said. I spilled out the fake key, the texts, and the picture from my hallway. He was silent for a while. "Are you at home? Are your doors locked?" I checked the peephole again, but nothing. "What should I do?" "You need to leave." Matt said, "Come to my place right now." He was correct, but the thought of opening my door made my stomach turn. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I wouldn't be alone the moment I stepped outside, so I made myself get up and got my phone, keys, jacket, and anything else I might need. I stood at the door and listened to the silence. I took a deep breath, slid the chain off, and unlocked the deadbolt. The second I turned the knob, my phone buzzed again. I glanced down at the screen. Unknown number. "See you soon." Every hair on my body stood on end. No, I wasn't doing this. I wasn't going outside. Instead, I relocked the door, backed away, and called the police. This time I wasn't second-guessing. The cops arrived within 15 minutes. I stayed on the phone with the dispatcher the entire time, keeping my voice low, my ears tuned to every sound outside my door. When I finally heard the knock, a real knock followed. By police, I nearly collapsed from relief. I opened the door to two uniformed officers, both of them scanning the hallway. "Are you the one who called?" one of them asked. I nodded, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. "Yes, someone's been watching me, sending me messages. They were out here, right here." They asked for details. I told them everything. One of the officers took my phone, scrolling through the texts. His expression darkened. "And you have no idea who this could be?" "No clue," I said. "I don't recognize the number, and I never told anyone about the key." The other officer walked down the hallway, checking around. "No cameras in the building." I shook my head. "Just in the lobby. Nothing up here." The first officer handed me back my phone. "You should file a report, and you need to be careful." I exhaled slowly. "So that's it. There's nothing you can do. We'll run the number, but if it's a burner, it won't lead anywhere." He admitted. "Do you have somewhere else you can stay for the night?" I nodded. "Yeah, my friend's place." "Good," he said. "Pack a bag and go now, and if you get any more messages, call us immediately." I did exactly what they said. I packed the bag and left. My breathing wasn't correct until I got inside my vehicle and locked the doors. As soon as I drove away from the curb, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw a dark figure standing at the far end of the street. I wanted to think it was a coincidence, but I knew better. Hood pulled up, standing too still, observing my vehicle, leaving my hands locked around the wheel, my heart slamming in my chest. After staying at Matt's for a few nights, I stopped receiving messages, changed my number, and did everything I could to blend in with whoever was watching me. For a while, it worked, but last week, I stopped by my old building to pick up some mail that had been sent to my old address, and as I was leaving, I noticed something. Someone new had moved into my old place, and they had a brand new, clean mat in front of their door, and right underneath the corner of it was a key. I stared at it for a long time, my chest tight. Was it real, or was it just a test? Sometimes when I go along silent halls, I still feel the weight of invisible eyes watching, waiting, and knowing more than they should. I have no idea who put the bogus key under my mat that day, who stole it, or even whether they ever left. I like to think I would notice if something changed in my home. I live alone, so everything stays exactly where I leave it. If I set my keys on the counter, they'll be there when I get back. If I leave my bedroom door slightly open before bed, it will still be that way in the morning. That's why when I turned off the lights last night and glanced at my bedroom door, something immediately felt wrong. It took me a second to understand why. Then my stomach dropped. A deadbolt, a heavy-duty lock installed on the outside. I stood frozen, my mind racing. I stepped closer, running my fingers over the cool metal. It wasn't mine. It wasn't supposed to be there. I would have noticed something like this before, wouldn't I? The screws looked clean, new, barely worn. I swallowed hard. Someone had installed this recently. I checked the rest of the apartment, my heart pounding. I knew I wouldn't find anything, but I needed to look. The windows locked, the front door locked, the spare key I kept hidden in a drawer still there. Everything was exactly as I had left it except for the lock on my door. I grabbed my phone and sent a text. Did maintenance come by today? There's a lock on my bedroom door that wasn't there before. No response. I checked the time, 11:47 p.m. I ran my fingers over the lock again, feeling a dull pressure in my chest. If it was maintenance, why wouldn't they tell me? If it wasn't, who did this? Why wouldn't they tell me? A lock like this only served one purpose, which was to keep someone inside. I turned the bolt to see if it worked, and it did. My throat tightened. Someone had installed this on my apartment door, and they had a key. I didn't sleep. I lay awake, eyes locked on my bedroom door, and every little sound made my skin crawl. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the pipes shifting in the walls, and the occasional creak of my neighbor's footsteps above me. Every time I heard something, I imagined a shadow standing on the other side of the door, someone waiting, someone listening, someone testing the lock. I hardly slept at all, but when my alarm went off, I had myself get out of bed. I checked my phone first, but my landlord hadn't responded. I considered phoning him, but something about this seemed too important to discuss over the phone. I had to check one more item before I went, even though I needed to meet him in person. I took my keys and went outside, shutting my bedroom door behind me. After taking a deep breath, I tested the lock and it turned easily. I felt a chill go up my spine. Whoever placed this there wasn't just trying to scare me. They wanted to make sure they could lock me inside. I left my apartment and went straight to the leasing office, where the receptionist hardly looked up from her computer. She said, "I need something," and pointed to the back, saying, "He's in his office." David scowled and pulled for his phone, saying, "I must have missed it." He glanced up from his desk, shocked that you hadn't responded to my text. "What's happening?" I paused for a while before deciding to simply say, "There's a new lock on my bedroom door." His eyebrows flew up when he saw that it wasn't there before I continued. "I'm not sure when or how, but it wasn't me." I asked David, "Do you have a list of people who have access to my apartment?" He nodded. "Just the maintenance team and me, and obviously whoever you gave a copy of your key to." I clenched my jaw. "Are you sure maintenance didn't install it?" "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't sure." He sighed and shook his head. "No one reported any work in your unit, and maintenance wouldn't just install a lock without telling you." When I asked David to check if there were any key card entries to your unit, he pulled up something on his computer and I leaned over his desk to watch the screen as he scrolled. When he stopped, his frown deepened, and I felt a chill run down my back. He said, "But it wasn't a staff key card, It was yours. I shook my head. That's impossible, as I was at work. He gave me a perplexed look. Are you sure? I asked, taking out my phone and going through my messages, and then I showed him a text I had sent to a coworker at 2:30 p.m. last night. Someone had been in my apartment while I was at work, installing a lock that was intended to trap me inside. I gripped the edge of his desk, my nails digging into the wood. I told David that I wouldn't be coming home until after 6. He stared at the screen for a while before turning back to his computer. Then, someone used a duplicate of your key. I felt a chill go through me. Can you check security cameras? I questioned him. You should probably call the police, but David hesitated. The hall cameras don't record, they're just live feed. Of course they were. A few days after leaving the workplace, I took out my phone. I phoned 911 with trembling fingers. A dispatcher answered. What emergency do you have? I took a deep breath. Within 30 minutes, 2 officers, a man and a woman, entered my apartment and scanned the area as I explained the break-in, the lock, and the fact that someone had used a copy of my key while I was at work. Officer Patel asked, "You're sure this wasn't here before?" Patel asked positive, and I replied, "I would have noticed." She nodded and tested the lock. The person who installed this was skilled. Officer Green pointed to my front door and showed no traces of forced entry, so they either had a duplicate of your key or got in some other way. It's drilled and clean. There is no damage to the door frame, and my stomach is bent, indicating it wasn't a hurried job. The landlord said it was my key card, although I wasn't there when the apartment records showed an entrance at 2:34 p.m. yesterday. Patel and Green shared a glance that transformed the situation, and Green stated if someone had cloned your key, they may return at any moment. My flesh pricked. Could you look for fingerprints? The surface is too smooth, and if they were attentive, they most likely wiped it off, Patel said, shaking her head. Green closed his notebook. Do you know who may be interested in doing this? I hesitated, but I said, no, I don't have any enemies or stalkers. I live alone, and I don't give out my key. The cops seem to be certain that anybody could enter your flat in the past. Patel asked a friend or ex. I started to say anything, but then I stopped because I realized it was a former roommate, not an ex or friend. 6 months ago, I had briefly lived with someone named Daniel. We had only been roommates for a couple of months before I asked him to leave. He made me uncomfortable, not in a violent way. He was never aggressive, but in a quiet, unsettling way. He always knew too much about my schedule, always hovered a little too close, and once I caught him going through my closet when I got home from work early. I had confronted him about it, and he laughed, brushed it off like it was nothing. That night, I decided I didn't want to live with him anymore. I gave him 2 weeks to move out. He left without argument, but now what if he never really left? I told the officers everything. Patel's expression darkened. Did he ever return his key when he moved out? I felt my stomach drop. I don't know, I admitted. I assumed he did. Green scribbled something in his notepad. Do you have his last name? I nodded and gave them what little I knew. I didn't have his number anymore, but I still had old messages from when we first moved in. Together, Patel took a deep breath. We'll look into him. In the meantime, you need to stay somewhere else tonight. I exhaled, realizing how tense my body had been. Yeah, I already planned on it. Green handed me a card and said, call us if anything else happens, and don't go home alone until we clear this up. I took the card, my fingers still shaking, and left that night to stay with a friend across town. I had a feeling I knew exactly who it was, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel waiting outside my bedroom door, testing the lock. The next day, the police called and discovered Daniel living in an empty apartment on my floor. The apartment had been unoccupied for months, but the landlord had never changed the locks. While the police examined Daniel's home, they discovered tools, extra keys, a notebook with dates and times recording my schedule, and, worst of all, a second lock. Daniel must have copied his previous key and moved in while no one noticed. Another lock, much like the one he put on my door even though he is in jail for breaking and entering, trespassing, and attempted unlawful imprisonment. I still check my doors every night because the thing that worries me the most isn't that he locked my bedroom door, but rather that he may have done it while I was asleep. The officers told me something I'll never forget. He was planning to do this to your front door. I moved out the same week and changed my number to make sure Daniel couldn't find me. I never gave dating apps much attention since they usually seemed like a waste of embarrassing time. Dead-end small talk or worse, being ghosted after a few messages. But I was bored and my friends insisted that I put myself out there, so I thought I'd make a profile, add a few good photos, and fill in the basic information about my profession, hobbies, and favorite foods. A few days in, I matched with a man called Evan who appeared typical and secure. His images were basic, including one at the gym and another with a dog, and his profile was straightforward: coffee addict dog, coffee guy. Let's avoid the small conversation, Dad. Evan's initial communication to me did throw up alarms, but nothing else did. I was wondering when we would eventually match, so I frowned at the computer and wrote back, "Oh, we've crossed paths before." It took him a few minutes to answer, "Evan, not exactly, but I see you a lot. You're kind of a creature of habit," which made my stomach knot. I took a while before responding. "Evan, what do you mean? You consistently go to the gym on 8th Street Monday through Friday after work, and you always have a vanilla latte at the same cafe before work." I became cold. I reviewed the messages again before adding that information on my profile. Something about the way he said it, the assurance in his words as if he knew for sure, made my skin crawl. My fingers lingering over the keyboard must have been a joke, right? Perhaps he simply assumed. Perhaps he was a regular at the same locations and recognized me. "That's rather particular, Evan," and I had myself respond. "Do we know each other? Although it's not official, I feel like I know you." That statement is weighing heavily on my chest in my email, with no explanation or follow-up. I took a deep breath and locked my phone. Perhaps I was overreacting, or perhaps it was nothing, but as I sat in my apartment looking at my screen in the dim light, I noticed something else. My last name was missing from my dating app profile. How could he have found me online even if he had recognized me from the gym or cafe? I told myself that I didn't feel like going for my normal coffee run the next morning and that I would instead get something at work. But in reality, I didn't want to face the danger of bumping into him by lunch since my curiosity had gotten the better of me. After I didn't reply, I reopened the app, half expecting him to have unpaired me, but instead he had a fresh message ready. I was hesitant to open it, but when I did, my heart fell. I read it again. I hadn't gone to the cafe that morning, and I hadn't informed anybody that I was altering my pattern, but he was aware of it and was keeping track. My hands were clammy as I typed out a response that said, "Are you following me?" I regretted sending it because as soon as I hit send, the typing bubble appeared and then vanished. I clenched my jaw and waited until the message finally appeared. "Evan, you're being dramatic. It's just observation." My heart was racing because I felt like I was a project that he was studying, and I had to stop this. I blocked him, closed the app, and tried to get rid of the feeling that I had just made a mistake because blocking him should have been the end of it. That's how it's supposed to work, right? You block someone, and they disappear from your life. No messages or contact. But Evan didn't disappear that night. Even though I had blocked Evan on the dating app, I had a new message request from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it, thinking that blocking me wouldn't change anything. My stomach dropped, and I stared at the screen with my pulse thudding in my ears. I had barely slept, and every sound in my apartment made me jump, including the hum of the refrigerator, the distant honking from the street below, and the occasional creak from the hallway outside. I told myself that I was being paranoid, that I was allowing a stranger from a dating app to enter my head. How did Evan get my number when I never gave it to him? I turned off my phone because this was so strange and dangerous. I needed to talk to someone, maybe the police, but what would I say that a guy from a dating app knew my schedule and texted me after I blocked him? It wasn't illegal, creepy, and definitely stalkerish, but not enough for them to take seriously. If I had learned anything from watching too many true crime stories, it was that you have to have proof before anyone listens. That day, I decided to try something new. Instead of going to work at my usual time, I left an hour later, taking a different street, and instead of getting coffee at the Grind, I went to a place across town. I kept looking over my shoulder the entire time, but for the first time in days, there was no sign of him. Maybe he had been bluffing, maybe he wasn't really watching me. I let my phone fall. He was aware that he had been observing me, therefore my hands grew cold. After a minute, Evan was the only person who paid attention, so I clenched my jaw and chest tightly in fear that he would leave me alone or call the police. I forced myself to breathe while gripping the edge of my kitchen counter, and my stomach twisted as I stared at my phone, my mind racing. I needed to end this. I thought he would stand back and see how serious I was, but instead he sent me a message that chilled me to the bone. I stumbled back, my heart racing, and rushed to the window, pulling the blinds open as I saw a picture of my apartment building taken from the street directly below my window. The street was almost deserted, with no sign of him, but the message was clear. He was here, watching, waiting, and he wasn't going anywhere. I slammed the blinds shut, my heart hammering in my ears. This wasn't just creepy anymore. It wasn't just unsettling messages or a guy knowing too much about my schedule. Evan was outside my apartment. I made myself think that I needed to do something, and calling the police was the obvious option. However, what would I say if I had matched with someone online and he was now threatening me vaguely, saying that he knew my routine and had somehow found my number? They would probably tell me that it wasn't enough to take any action, but the photo showed that it was proof. Reaching for my phone, I phoned 911. I tried to regulate my breathing by pressing the phone to my ear with wet palms. 911, what emergency do you have? My voice trembled as I added, I have a stalker. He matched me with someone on a dating app and is now messaging me from outside my apartment, threatening me directly. I didn't exactly hesitate, but he emailed me a picture of himself observing me from just outside my building. I told the dispatcher your address, and she assured me that an officer was on his way. "Stay inside and keep your doors locked," she added, and then hung up. I gripped my phone tightly. With my stomach in knots, I had shut my door. As I tiptoed near the front door, double-checking the lock and the peephole, I felt a rush of frigid panic. The hallway was empty, so I took a step back to settle my breathing and tell myself that the cops would arrive soon. I had to wait, but suddenly my phone buzzed with another message. "I didn't want to look or find out, but did you truly believe the police could assist you?" A new surge of fear swept over me. My whole body went cold as I stared at the screen, wondering how he knew the dispatcher had just sent a unit. He couldn't have possibly received another text because they always take too long. I thought I was going to get sick, so I grabbed the kitchen knife because that was the only thing I could think to do. I backed into the living room, keeping my eyes on the door every second. Then there was a knock, and I almost dropped the knife. There were 3 gentle, purposeful knocks on my front door, and I held my breath until I heard a voice that was familiar, but it wasn't from my phone or messages from somewhere else. I moved my heart closer to my neck. "Evan," I said. Silence, then a chuckle. "See, I told you I'd pay attention." I staggered backward, clutching the knife as tightly as I could with my knuckles. How long had he been this close? How long had he been inside my building without my knowledge? I could hear his slow, patient breathing through the door. He wasn't in a hurry because he knew he had me trapped. Then, a distant wail of police sirens broke the stillness, and I turned toward the window, hope fluttering in my chest. When the police arrived, I told them everything, the messages, the photos, and the way he knew my schedule down to the smallest details, and they took it seriously for once. However, Evan was gone. There was no sign of him in the building, no security footage of him entering. It was as if he had never been there at all. I knew better, so I changed everything. After that, I moved apartments, changed jobs, got a new number, deleted all of my social media accounts, stopped using dating apps, and for weeks, I hardly slept in anticipation of another text or message. Another picture demonstrating that Evan had located me again, but it never materialized, and I still don't feel secure because Evan was meticulous, had everything planned, and spoke to me through the door that evening as though he had done this before, was still watching, and would do it again. Since I've never been a big sleeper, every little sound wakes me up, including creaking floorboards, distant vehicle alarms, and the wind shaking the trees outside. I always keep my room quiet and chilly, with my window shut and my blackout curtains pulled tight, so I knew something wasn't right. The air in my room seemed different and colder as soon as I woke up. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I sat up and turned to face the window. The curtains were still closed, and nothing seemed amiss, but then I saw faint, greasy fingerprints at the bottom corner of the glass. I twisted my fingers in my stomach. I was certain that I had locked the window before going to bed, but someone had been right there, touching the glass and attempting to get in. I forced myself to breathe. Perhaps there was a reason. Perhaps I had touched the glass earlier and forgotten. Perhaps it was condensation, or perhaps it was just random streaks that looked like prints. Long streaks that appeared as though someone had pressed their hand against the window from the outside caused my throat to dry out. My apartment is on the second floor, but the fire escape runs right past my window. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone climbed up, messed around, and left. Maybe it was maintenance. The landlord had people check the building occasionally, but wouldn't they have told me? I texted my landlord to ask if anyone had been on the fire escape. I reached forward and pressed my hand next to the marks, which were different in size and weren't mine. I checked the lock, which was still locked, and found no evidence of tampering, but that didn't mean someone hadn't tried. It gave me a sick feeling. The night before I sat there staring at the screen waiting, then my phone buzzed. Landlord, no inspections scheduled. Why? My stomach dropped. I went to work, but I couldn't focus. The image of those smudged fingerprints stuck in my head. By the time I got home, the sun had set. My apartment was dark, quiet, and as soon as I stepped inside, I felt it again, that wrongness. I flipped on the lights and checked the window. The prints were still there, but this time, they were higher up, as if whoever had been there last night had come back, and this time they had pressed their hand against the glass while standing watching, waiting. I locked the door, pulled the blinds, checked the fire escape. No one there, but the feeling wouldn't leave because I knew someone had been outside my window, and I had no idea if they were still watching me right now. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I turned off the lights, got under the covers, closed my eyes, but every time I started drifting off, my mind jolted me awake all I could. Think about where those fingerprints. Someone had been outside my window, and if they had come back once, what if they came back again at around 2 a.m.? I decided to check the fire escape instead of sleeping, so I got a flashlight and made myself do something I really didn't want to do. Before shining the light outside my bedroom window, I pushed it open just a crack. The metal stairs led down, empty and silent, with no scuff marks, footprints, or indications of who had been outside. However, this didn't make me feel any better because I knew someone had been there, and worse, I didn't know. When I cleaned the window the following morning, I took pictures first, just in case, and then I used disinfectant to scrub away the greasy imprints. I convinced myself that whoever it was had grown bored and moved on, and I even managed to get some sleep that night. However, when I woke up the following morning, I noticed that the fingerprints had returned, and this time they were higher up, smeared along the glass as though someone had leaned in closer, pressing their face against the window. I stumbled back, my heart thumping in my ears. But I knew that this wasn't normal. Someone was testing me while I waited for something. I called my landlord again, asking if they were certain that no one had been on the fire escape, but I could ask the maintenance guys why someone was touching my window. You want me to contact the police, landlord? That night, I stayed up, kept the lights off, sat up in bed with my phone in hand, and watched the window waiting. Nothing happened, at least not at first, but then around 3 in the morning, I wondered if I should even tell them that there were handprints on my window and that I hadn't really seen anyone. They would come look around and tell me to put up a camera, and maybe I should. I heard a gentle, purposeful tap on the glass, and I stopped breathing. The sound was cautious, as if someone was checking to see if I was awake, and I sat there, frozen in terror, staring at the shadowy figure just beyond the curtains. I had two options: either stay motionless or confront whoever was outside, so I chose the second option. Slowly, but surely, I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight, aimed it at the window, and something moved. The shadowy figure ducked away from the light. I heard heavy, fast footsteps as they ran down the fire escape, and by the time I reached the window, They were gone. I called the police again, this time with documentation, and I showed them the fingerprints, and they checked the fire escape, finding no evidence of forced entry or security cameras pointing in the right direction. The police didn't stay long. They asked the standard questions, such as whether I had seen anyone hanging around the building, if I had received any strange messages or threats, and if I had any enemies. I told them not to all of them. Someone had been outside my window, and they weren't just passing through, they had been watching me, perhaps waiting for an opportunity or a mistake. But one thing was certain, they were going to return. I had no idea who was doing this, why, or worse, if they did. The officer I spoke with, I believe his name was Martinez, gave me a flimsy assurance before leaving, saying, "If they try again, call us immediately." I knew better because this wasn't random. Whoever was outside my window was targeting me, and I didn't sleep at all after the cops left. I sat on my bed, gripping my phone like a lifeline, and stared out the window. The faint outline of smudged fingerprints still visible in the glare of the street lights. I should have gone to a hotel, crashed at a friend's place, or anything else, but I needed to know if they returned so I could see their face. I bought a cheap motion-activated security camera the following morning and placed it on my windowsill, pointing straight at the fire escape. I waited that night without turning on the lights, lying in bed with my phone in hand and staring at the feed from my new camera. It was grainy in the dark, but it was clear enough that I would see anyone who climbed the fire escape again. I told myself that I wouldn't sleep, that I would watch all night, but eventually I fell asleep, and when I woke up, I was so excited that I almost dropped my phone when it detected motion in my stomach. I held my breath as the timestamp appeared on the screen at 3:12 a.m., twisted as I touched the alert and the film loaded. Then a figure stepped onto the fire escape. They moved slowly and carefully, with a dark hood covering their face. They leaned toward my window and pressed a hand against the glass. I watched with nausea for more than 2 minutes before something happened that made my blood drop. They took a key out of their pocket and pressed it against the window. I called the police again, and this time they took me seriously. They looked through the building and checked the footage, asking if I had given a key to anyone recently. No. I had no idea where they got it. Did they steal it, made a copy, and found one that I was unaware was missing? The police had no answers, but they did have advice: pack your bags and stay somewhere else for a few days. The file arrived a minute later, and I hesitated before opening it because I wasn't sure I wanted to see it, but I had to. The footage was clearer than mine, showing the fire escape outside my window and the dim glow of the street lights below. At first nothing happened, but at 3:12 a.m., someone stepped into frame, not just me. Martinez said, "This time I listened." I left that night to stay with a friend across town, barely slept, and 2 days later, my landlord called. "You're not going to believe this," he said in a voice tight with unease. I gasped as I saw that I was wearing the same hoodie and that, in the dim light, my face was hardly visible. I watched in horror as I approached the window of my own bedroom and pressed a hand against the glass before carefully taking a key out of my pocket and pressing it against the window. I let my phone fall. That wasn't me. And I hadn't gone back or been close to my apartment, so how come I don't live there anymore? I packed up and left the same day I watched the video, and I have no idea how they did it since they looked just like me. How they were aware that my window was locked, but I do know that whatever was outside was attempting to replace me rather than break in, and I got out of there before they could. I had never given my boyfriend's ex much thought. I knew her name was Lena, and I knew they had been together for 3 years before splitting up 6 months prior to our meeting. I knew he didn't like talking about her, so I didn't push why he would, but that was before the message before Lena vanished. On a Thursday night, I was at home, curled up on the couch, scrolling through my phone while waiting for Owen to come over. I had had a long day at work and was partially preoccupied by a reality show playing in the background. Initially, I thought it was spam, but something forced me to check the unknown number. "I must speak with you about Owen." I clenched my fingers around my phone. I hesitated before responding to Owen, my lover, but he almost instantly gave me an unfamiliar number. Lena, Owen's ex, and I had never talked or met before, and as far as I knew, she didn't even reside in the city anymore. Why was she messaging me now? 1,000 questions crossed my mind, but before I could send a reply, I scowled, knowing that he was lying when he said that I'm insane, jealous, and unable to let go. I thought that was because it had been a difficult breakup because Owen had never really talked about her at all. He had only ever mentioned that things ended badly and he didn't want to bring it up, but he had never called her crazy. Was she assuming he did? I stared at the message, not knowing what to say, and then another text from Lena. "I can't tell more, but please believe me when I advise that you must exercise caution." I felt a shiver of caution about him, but before I could write anything, my phone chimed again. I read the message again, my pulse racing, and it seemed like a warning. If anything were to happen to me, don't trust what he says. A frantic one, followed by quiet. I wrote back, "What do you mean?" but got no reply. A cold pit formed in my stomach as I waited for the typing bubble to appear on the computer. I dialed the number, but it only rang once before going straight to voicemail. A tap at the door almost made me jump. My heart was still pounding as I glanced up at the message. And I took a deep breath trying to steady myself before getting up and opening the door. He smiled at me, the same easy, charming smile that had drawn me in when we first met. "Hey babe." For the first time I hesitated before letting him, and I wanted to ask him about Lena, about what had happened between them, about why she would send me a message like that, but I didn't. Instead, I forced a smile and stepped aside, letting him inside. Because I needed more time to think, because I wasn't ready to hear his answer, because for the first time since I met him I wasn't sure I wanted to know the truth. I tried to act normal. I let Owen and kissed him on the cheek and pretended like everything was fine, but inside my mind was racing. Lena's message was burnt into my brain. "You need to be careful, please. I can't say more. Just trust me. If anything happens to me, don't believe what he tells you." I sat across from Owen, on the couch, pretending to listen as he talked about his day. He was laughing about something a coworker did, completely unaware of the tight knot in my stomach. I wanted to ask him, I wanted to demand answers, but I hesitated. What if Lena was lying? What if she really was just the jealous ex? Would bringing it up make me seem paranoid, or worse, would it make Owen angry? I nodded when appropriate and attempted a grin, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Lena never responded to my texts, so I kept checking my phone until Owen noticed everything was fine. He asked, gesturing toward my phone, and I nodded too quickly and unnaturally. "Yeah, just work stuff," I said, lying. He held my gaze for a second longer than usual, then smiled and stretched, wrapping an arm around me as if nothing was wrong, but I couldn't relax when she vanished the following day. I tried calling her again, but the number went straight to voicemail. I checked her social media, but there were no updates, and I even Googled her name, but nothing strange turned up. She simply stopped talking to me. I told myself that I was overreacting and that perhaps she had changed her mind about warning me. If Owen didn't tell me, maybe someone else would, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something wasn't right, so I decided to find out more about their breakup. That afternoon, I discovered Mia, who was, at least based on social media, one of Lena's old friends because they used to tag each other in posts and comment on each other's photos. I messaged her, "Hey, this is really random, but I wanted to ask you something about Lena. I've been dating Owen, and I was hesitant to continue until she sent me a strange message the other day. She seemed afraid of him, but she isn't responding. I just wanted to know if you've spoken to her recently." I stared at my phone, waiting, and Mia read the message almost instantly. After a long pause, she began typing, "Get away from him." My blood ran cold. Get away from him, please. My heart is pounding in my ears, and I'm holding onto my phone harder. What happened? Do you know? Mia, she was afraid of him. He never physically assaulted her, as far as I know, but he was domineering. He would gaslight her, isolate her, and track her phone, showing up at unexpected locations. When she finally ended their relationship, she vowed that he was still watching her, and I swallowed hard because that didn't sound like the owl. But did I really know him? I paused before typing one more. She told me that she had to caution me not to trust him if anything were to happen to her. Mia responded very immediately, and then she got into trouble. Lena hadn't been lying. She wasn't just some jealous ex attempting to frighten me away. She was scared, and now she was gone. This made me feel terrible. With my hands shaking, I sat motionless on my couch and read through the messages again. I needed to talk to Owen and find out what he wasn't telling me, but if Lena was right and Owen was truly dangerous, then facing him head-on could be the worst thing I've ever done. I was at a loss for what to do next, so I just stared at my phone screen while Mia's words kept repeating in my mind. She's in trouble. Lena had attempted to warn me, but since she was no longer with me, I had to decide whether to face Owen or call the police. I had a gut sense that something was really wrong, but I had no evidence other than a few texts. I took a deep breath and performed the one action I should have taken sooner. The last time I called Lena's number, I didn't expect a response. This time, the phone rang twice, then 3 times, and then someone answered. I jumped up and said, "I'm almost breathless, and I can hear faint, shaky breathing like someone was trying to stay quiet." I swallowed hard. "Lena, are you okay? Where are you?" A chill went through my entire body, and before she could answer, the call cut off. I stood there, my heart pounding, and I dialed 911 right away. When the dispatcher answered, I forced myself to speak clearly. I explained that my boyfriend's ex-girlfriend was missing, and that she tried to warn me about him. I called her, and she answered, but she sounded scared. The dispatcher took me seriously and asked for details. I told them all I knew, including Lena's full name, Owen, and the last time I saw her, and then something occurred to me. Owen had mentioned that Lena still had some of her old things in a storage unit. What if she was there? I told the dispatcher send officers to check it out. She assured me. I felt like I could finally breathe. 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed. An officer named Detective Ellis called me back. We found her, he said. I nearly collapsed onto the couch in relief. Is she okay? She's shaken up, he admitted, but she's alive. I shut my eyes, trying to steady myself. Where was she? I asked. There was a long pause, and then the words that made my blood run cold. In Owen's storage unit. I sat there gripping the phone. She was locked inside. I whispered, yeah. The detective sighed. She was dehydrated, scared out of her mind, but she said she had only been there since last night. That means someone put her there recently. I felt sick. Owen, that's what we're going to find out. That night Owen was arrested, and the police questioned him. He denied everything, said he had no idea how Lena got into his storage unit, but the evidence stacked against him. Elena told the police he had been stalking her for months. He would show up at her work, her gym, even outside her apartment. She had blocked his number, but he always found ways to contact her, and when she sent me that warning message, he must have found out, because that night she had been walking home and someone had grabbed her. Someone had thrown her into his storage unit and left her there. She may not have arrived if I hadn't phoned, and the police hadn't checked, but it took some time before Owen was charged with abduction and illegal confinement. Following months of court fights, Owen was given an 8-year jail term after Lena and I both testified against him. Lena tried to warn me, and because I listened, she's still alive, and Owen is exactly where he belongs. I haven't spoken to him since his arrest because I don't want to. But occasionally I wonder what would have happened if I had disregarded her message that night and written her off as just another resentful ex. I've never given grocery shopping much thought. I simply go in, get what I need, and go. It's a normal, monotonous experience, which is why I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary when I entered the store that evening, just after 8 p.m. A few people were milling about, pushing carts, checking labels, and going about their own business while the fluorescent lights cast a dull glow over the aisles. I grabbed a basket and began going through my list, which included bread, eggs, coffee, and the usual. Nothing unusual. But after 10 minutes or so, I heard the intercom crackle to life and a voice speaking overhead. Please come to the store's front, Alex. The voice stated my name clearly, and I briefly paused, thinking I had misheard. I looked around, expecting to see someone searching for me, possibly a colleague who had seen me shopping or someone I knew making a joke, but nobody was listening. Customers scarcely noticed the news as they continued with their daily activities. When I got to the customer service desk, the woman behind the counter smiled politely and asked if I could help someone named Alex. I said, someone just called my name over the intercom, and she blinked, but I don't think I heard it, so I frowned. I didn't make any announcements, and as far as I know, no one else did either. I looked at the intercom phone that was on the desk with the receiver still in place, and I looked around at the staff behind the registers, but none of them seemed to be paying any attention to me. Who had called my name if no one had made the announcement? The woman behind the customer service desk hesitated, then looked at her coworkers. One of the managers, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a tired expression, walked over. Everything okay? I repeated what had happened, expecting him to at least take it seriously, but he just gave me a puzzled look. I stood there for a few seconds trying to process what the cashier had just said. No one had made an announcement. That wasn't possible, and I had heard it clearly as day. I asked, my voice coming out tighter than I intended. The intercom is only accessible by employees, and none of us have used it in the last 10 minutes. I looked at the other employees behind the registers, and they were all busy scanning groceries and assisting customers. None of them seemed even remotely interested in me. We don't have any record of an announcement being made. Do you record them? I asked. He shook his head no. I stroked the back of my neck in an attempt to get rid of the nagging anxiety. If none of you announced it, how did my name be called? The manager exhaled slowly as if he was trying to be patient. Perhaps you misheard? Occasionally, the system detects interference or static. I almost believed him, but static doesn't say my name, so I forced a nod despite my gut telling me something wasn't right. Maybe he then turned back to the customer service representative and said, "If you need anything else, let us know." That was it. The conversation ended, and I left feeling foolish. I could have misheard or imagined it, but as I grabbed my basket and made my way back toward the aisles, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I was being watched. The store's usual hum felt different, and every little sound made me tense. When I arrived at the self-checkout, I felt uneasy due to the beeping of the registers and the soft rustling of the things being stocked. I was nearly finished scanning my items with unsteady hands when the intercom crackled once again. "Alex, please come to the front of the store." I whipped my head up so fast my vision blurred. It was the same voice, calm, even unnerving. I turned toward the customer service desk expecting the employees to react, but no one did. Not a single person even looked up. My heart pounded. I looked around the store searching for someone, anyone who had heard it too. Nothing. It was like I was the only one who had heard my name. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to breathe. I needed to get out of here now. I grabbed my hurried toward the exit and pushed through the automatic doors into the cold night air. The parking lot was mostly empty, a few scattered cars, the glow of the street light stretching long eerie shadows across the pavement. I reached my car and unlocked it with shaking hands, throwing my groceries into the passenger seat. I sat there for a moment trying to slow my breathing. What the hell just happened? Then, out of habit, I checked my phone. I wish I hadn't, because there was a new notification on my screen, a text message from an unknown number. "You forgot something, Alex." I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. I didn't respond, didn't move. Then another message. "Turn around." I didn't. I threw the car into reverse and sped out of the parking lot, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I didn't stop until I was halfway home, heart hammering in my chest. I forced myself to glance in my rearview mirror. The parking lot was far behind me, empty, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I didn't go straight home. Something told me that would be a mistake. Instead, I drove to a well-lit gas station a few miles away, pulled into a spot near the entrance, and locked my doors. I went for my phone while my hands were still trembling. I looked at the previous message, turned around, and wasn't ready to start. Taking a deep breath, I tapped on the unknown number and blocked the person, preventing them from contacting me again. I then retrieved my call log and dialed the local police department's non-emergency number. "What's your emergency?" I was unsure of what to respond after hearing my name yelled over the shop intercom and receiving a spooky text. None of that was illegal, but I sensed something wasn't quite right. I said, "Hello, I think someone has been following me." The dispatcher's tone changed right away. "Are you in a safe place?" I asked. "I'm at a gas station. Can you describe what's happening?" I exhaled slowly. "At the grocery store, someone called my name over the intercom twice. When I asked the staff, they informed me that no one had made the announcement. After I left, I received a text from an unknown number saying, I forgot something and instructed me to turn around. Do you think someone might have been watching you inside the store? I swallowed hard. Did you notice anyone following you to your car? I thought back to those final few moments in the parking lot. The prolonged dark shadows. Do you want us to send an officer to look at the shop surveillance footage? I went quickly, so I wasn't searching for the eerie emptiness. I questioned whether they would even do that if you felt unsafe, because we take that seriously. She asked if you wanted an officer to meet you where you were. I looked around the gas station and saw some people coming in and going out, as well as cars pulling up to the pumps. I told her that I wasn't alone, but that it would be helpful if someone could look at the video. She took down the information and promised to follow up with the store. The next day, I received a call from an unknown number, which briefly made my stomach turn, but then I learned it was the police department, so I responded right away. "Hello, this is Officer Reynolds." I thanked her and hung up, but even as I sat there locked in my vehicle, I felt watched. "You reported a suspicious incident at the grocery store last night." I asked quickly if you had found anything. The officer paused, and we looked at the security footage. He said slowly, "You were right, no employees used the intercom." I shuddered when your name was called. I already knew that, but hearing it confirmed made my skin crawl. However, we did discover something else, and the way he said it chilled my blood. "You left the store at 8:52 p.m. We don't know," the officer said, adding that he kept his head down the entire time with his hood pulled over his face so no one recognized him. He said that at 8:54, a man left the store through a side entrance, walked to the parking lot, and stopped at the edge to watch your car as you drove away. I gripped my phone tighter. I took a deep breath. Did he follow me? We don't believe so. According to Reynolds, he stayed there for long before leaving the camera. We're attempting to follow him on the other security cameras. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding, and he called my name. We don't know how he did it, but he acknowledged that the intercom system isn't wireless and must be used from one of the store's phones. We checked all of them, but I heard it. I said, barely raising my voice above a whisper, "I believe you, but we don't know how it happened yet." I shakily exhaled. "What should I do?" "Keep an eye out," he said. I thanked him and hung up, and for the next few days, I was on high alert, changing my routine, taking different routes home, and constantly checking my surroundings, but nothing happened. It's been a few months since I stopped going to that grocery store, stopped shopping at night, and never ever disregarded my gut because I know what I heard and I know someone was watching, but I'm not sure why or if they'll ever return. The person who called my name that night and stood in the parking lot watching never showed up again, or perhaps they did and I simply didn't notice.